The wedding was a grand affair. Elegant chandeliers sparkled like frozen stars above a ballroom full of strangers clinking champagne glasses. But for Isabella Westbrook, the newlywed bride, it felt like a stage play in which her role had been written without her consent, and her co-star, Ethan Hawke, the enigmatic billionaire with glacier blue eyes, refused to even meet her gaze for longer than a few seconds. From the outside, their marriage looked like a perfect merger. Beauty and wealth united beneath golden arches of society. But inside the walls of their sprawling mansion, silence screamed louder than words ever could. Ethan, groomed by Wall Street and wounded by ghosts he never spoke of, treated his new bride with the kind of polite indifference one might reserve for a stranger on a private jet. Cordial, distant, untouched by feeling. Isabella, a woman raised with warmth in her voice and stars in her eyes, had dreamt of a love that would light every corner of her soul. But instead she found herself in a palace that felt more like a snow globe. Beautiful, trapped, and shaken by a hand she could never see. Each morning she woke to cold sheets and a colder stare. He'd rise early, slipping into tailored suits without saying a word, his footsteps echoing like a countdown in the marble hallways as he vanished behind tinted car windows, leaving her alone with chandeliers and chandeliers and chandeliers. She tried, oh, how she tried, to reach him with gentle smiles and soft questions, to stir a flicker of warmth from the man who wore his pain like an invisible armor. But he kept his distance with frightening precision, always one step away, always emotionally offshore. She decorated rooms he never entered, cooked dinners he never tasted, even learned the rhythm of his silence. But still her heart bruised itself against his walls, and each unanswered glance felt like a tiny rejection cutting deeper than the last. He was never cruel, never raised his voice, never touched her, not even on their wedding night, when she sat by the window in a silk nightgown while thunder murmured in the distance. And he closed the door to his separate bedroom without a backward glance. She often wondered if he even saw her, as a woman, as a wife, as a human being, or if she was just a pawn moved by family legacy and societal pressure, collateral in a chess game played between names and fortunes. Their house, a sprawling architectural masterpiece perched on the cliffs of Monterey, had everything. Ocean views, a piano that sang without fingers, fountains that danced in sync with the wind. But it lacked the one thing Isabella craved more than jewels or silk or ocean breeze: connection. Every time she passed him in the hall, their silence felt like the aftermath of a war that hadn't been fought yet, and the air grew heavier with each day he refused to let her in. Her reflection began to haunt her, eyes that once danced now dimmed, lips once painted with laughter now pressed in quiet despair. She stopped dressing up for dinner, stopped waiting by the stairs at midnight, stopped hoping for footsteps that never came. Her only companions were the echoes of her own questions. Why did he marry her if he couldn't bear to look at her? Was there something broken in her, or was he the one bleeding invisibly? The staff in the mansion walked on eggshells, exchanging glances they thought she couldn't see, pitying the beautiful young wife who lived like a ghost in her own home. But Isabella wasn't weak. She just believed in love, and that belief was beginning to wither under the weight of a man who had locked every door inside himself. Still, some part of her, fragile but unyielding, refused to give up completely. She began leaving small things for him: a note by his coffee, a book he once mentioned in passing, a piano melody played softly at twilight. Tiny messages that said, "I'm here. I see you. I want to know who you are beneath the ice." But Ethan, master of retreat, remained unreadable, his blue eyes colder than the Pacific winds that whipped against the windows of their silent, gilded prison. And as weeks turned into a hollow rhythm of routine and restraint, Isabella lay awake in a bed too big for one heart alone, praying that somewhere deep within the man who refused to touch her, there still existed a flicker of humanity not yet frozen by his past. Because what she feared most wasn't the absence of love. It was the terrifying thought that he might never let himself feel it again, not for anyone, not even for the woman he had vowed to share forever with. The nights grew heavier with silence. But Ethan Hawke found himself waking in the still hours, drawn by the soft echo of piano keys that floated like a ghost through the halls. And though he never entered the room, he lingered outside the doorway, letting the melody she played wrap around the cold steel of his guarded soul. A soul carved and scarred by a past he had spent years trying to bury, beneath contracts and skyscrapers and carefully orchestrated detachment. And yet, even in his effort to remain untouchable, something about Isabella, the quiet way she carried her heartbreak, the strength in her silence, the hope in her eyes when she thought no one was looking, began to unsettle the fortress he had spent so long reinforcing. He told himself it was nothing, just pity maybe, admiration at most, but not affection, not interest, not emotion. Because emotion was a liability, a game he'd once played and lost so spectacularly it nearly destroyed him. In his private study, hidden behind a mahogany shelf and a biometric lock, lay the pieces of a heart shattered years ago. Photographs that hadn't been burned, a half-written song on torn paper, and a single letter, creased at the edges, scented faintly with a perfume long gone from the world, that he hadn't read in years yet refused to throw away. He'd once loved deeply, recklessly, so sure of forever, until betrayal poisoned his dreams like acid poured over silk, and the woman he'd trusted with his name and future left him hollow, choosing wealth and power over love, turning his heart into a battleground where suspicion won every time. But Isabella was different, and that terrified him more than he cared to admit. She reminded him of the boy he used to be, the one who believed in Sunday mornings and whispered promises, and he hated that memory, hated that she stirred it up with every gentle look she never knew he caught. One rainy morning, while organizing a forgotten drawer in the west wing of the mansion, Isabella stumbled upon a hidden compartment tucked behind a false panel, her fingers trembling as she opened it to find old photos, a necklace with an engraved L, and the letter written in delicate cursive, where Ethan's former fiancée confessed to using him, thanked him for his generosity, and explained how she never truly loved him, only the idea of what he could give. Isabella's breath caught as she read the cruel elegance of the words, each line slicing through her like frostbite. Not because it was about another woman, but because it explained everything. The way Ethan flinched when touched, the haunted distance in his eyes, the pain he never let bleed out loud. She pressed the letter to her chest and wept, not for herself, but for him, for the man she was slowly falling in love with, even as he refused to love himself. She didn't confront him, didn't storm into his study demanding answers. No, she simply folded the letter back and returned it to its place, deciding in that moment that she wouldn't walk away like the woman before her had. She would stay, not as a martyr or a savior, but as someone who believed that even the coldest walls could crack beneath consistent kindness. Ethan, meanwhile, stood on the balcony that night, watching the storm bleed over the sea, and for the first time in years, he felt something stir, a flicker, a crack, a memory of how it felt to be seen, to be loved without condition. And though he couldn't name it yet, he knew it was tied to Isabella, the woman who had every right to hate him, but instead continued to offer him quiet understanding without asking for anything in return. He caught himself reaching for her name in the dark, whispering it under his breath as if afraid it would burn his tongue. And when he passed her in the hall the next morning, their eyes met longer than they ever had before. Not with warmth, not yet, but with something raw and unfinished. Isabella noticed, and her heart stumbled, because she saw it too, a fracture in his armor, a flicker in his blue eyes that said, maybe, just maybe, he was starting to see her, not just as the woman he married, but as the woman who might matter. The tension between them shifted subtly, no longer thick with indifference but heavy with unspoken truths. And though Ethan still avoided touch, still vanished behind walls of routine and avoidance, there was a difference now in the way he lingered by the piano, or the way his hand paused on the doorknob when he passed her room. And Isabella, holding onto the hope stitched into her soul like golden thread, decided that this wasn't just a marriage of circumstance. It was a battle worth fighting, even if the only weapon she had was love. and the patience to wait for the man behind the mask to finally come home to himself. The atmosphere in the grand mansion grew heavier with every passing day, the once promising glimmers of hope between Ethan and Isabella dimming beneath layers of cold silence and unspoken resentments. Until one evening, as the amber hues of dusk bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Isabella found herself wandering near the library, where muffled voices suddenly drew her attention. Curious and hesitant, she edged closer, heart pounding as she overheard the familiar, rough timbre of Derek's voice teasing Ethan. His words light yet pointed, joking about the beautiful but distant woman who had been thrust into Ethan's life as a mere accessory to power and status, the kind of wife one keeps for appearances, but never truly loves. Ethan's response, sharp and unexpected, cut through the air like glass breaking. "I don't care about her," he snapped, the words dripping with bitterness and finality. This marriage was a business deal, nothing more. And in that moment, Isabella's world shattered silently around her, her hands trembling as the weight of his rejection settled deep inside her chest like a stone sinking, feeling the cold betrayal of a man who looked at her not as a partner or even as a human being, but as a transaction, a line on a ledger to be checked off and forgotten. She fled from the doorway, tears blurring her vision as she retreated to the solitude of their vast bedroom, the walls closing in around her as the truth settled like dust over every dream she had dared to dream. This was no love story, no fairy tale. It was a cage forged from silence and cold indifference, and she was trapped inside, aching for a warmth that would never come. The next morning, driven by a courage born of heartbreak, Isabella confronted Ethan in the sleek kitchen where he stood, stiff and unmoved, the early sunlight failing to soften the hardened lines of his face. She spoke softly but firmly, voice trembling. "Why? Why do you say those things about me when I've only tried to reach you?" But Ethan's eyes, as blue and distant as winter skies, refused to meet hers, his silence louder than any words, a wall more impenetrable than the mansion's stone facade. No apology came, no explanation, only the cold retreat of a man who had chosen solitude over vulnerability, leaving Isabella clutching the fragments of her own shattered hope. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan's distance became a chasm, his presence like a shadow that haunted but never truly touched her, and Isabella found herself wandering the halls alone, her laughter a ghostly echo, her smiles hollow masks worn for the world, but meaningless behind closed doors. She fought tears in meetings, buried her pain beneath layers of elegance and composure. But in the quiet moments when the house was still and the world outside moved on without her, the betrayal burned brightest, a cruel reminder that love, for her, was unrequited, a story told only in silence and missed chances. Even Derek, who tried to bridge the gulf with jokes and well-meaning advice, couldn't penetrate the walls Ethan had built. And Isabella realized that the man she married was a stranger, a man haunted by past wounds too deep to heal, a man who had shut her out completely. Yet in that bitter moment, amid the shards of her broken heart, Isabella made a quiet vow, not of revenge or bitterness, but of survival and self-worth. She would not be defined by the coldness of a man who refused to love her, nor would she disappear into the shadows of a loveless marriage. Instead, she would find her own light, even if it meant walking through the darkness alone. And though Ethan remained a distant figure behind glass walls and guarded secrets, the echoes of his cruel words would linger in her soul like a haunting melody, one that she would learn to face, to conquer, and ultimately to rise above. The night had arrived wrapped in a dark and furious storm, the heavens unleashing a relentless downpour that hammered against the towering windows of the Hawk mansion with a fury that seemed to echo the tempest raging inside Ethan and Isabella's hearts. As the wind howled like a wild creature and thunder rolled across the sky, shaking the very foundation of their opulent home, the power abruptly cut out, plunging the grand estate into an unsettling darkness that forced the two strangers bound by a cold marriage to face each other, without the usual distractions of their isolated worlds. No glittering chandeliers, no soft background music, no walls to hide behind, just the raw, unfiltered reality between them. Ethan, initially stiff and guarded, felt the weight of silence pressing down like the storm itself. And though he tried to maintain his icy demeanor, the vulnerability he had so long suppressed began to surface like cracks in a once impenetrable fortress, while Isabella, sensing the rare fragility beneath his aloof exterior, softened her gaze and stepped closer, her presence a gentle beacon in the darkness, the air thick with tension and unspoken emotions. Ethan finally broke the silence, his voice low and heavy with memories, confessing the heartbreak that had chained him to this fortress of solitude. How a love he once believed unbreakable had been shattered by betrayal, a woman he trusted abandoning him for another, leaving his heart fractured and his faith in love shattered. He admitted the cruel truth that since that devastating wound, he had been running, hiding behind walls of coldness and business to shield himself from ever feeling such pain again. Isabella listened, her own heart aching for the man who had suffered so silently, understanding at last why the warmth she yearned for had always been just out of reach, her compassion blossoming into something stronger and more patient as she reached out, her hand trembling slightly as it brushed against his, a simple touch that spoke volumes, an unspoken promise that she was there, willing to walk through his darkness with him. As the storm outside battered the mansion, inside a fragile bridge began to form between them, their shared vulnerability drawing them closer in ways neither expected, the walls of ice slowly melting into tentative warmth. They talked through the night, sharing fragments of their pasts, hopes, and fears, the storm's fury outside mirroring the emotional storm within. But as dawn approached, the tempest had not only passed the skies but also the cold distance between them. For the first time, Ethan's blue eyes held a softness reserved only for Isabella, and her smile carried a quiet strength born from understanding, signaling a shift that promised healing and new beginnings. A fragile but hopeful start to a connection neither dared to hope for before. In the stillness that followed, as light seeped gently through the rain-streaked windows, they both realized that the storm had done more than trap them inside a house. It had torn down the walls they had built around their hearts, leaving behind the tender possibility of love, born not from convenience or duty, but from shared pain, honesty, and the courage to be vulnerable together. The storm had passed, but the air between Ethan and Isabella was charged with a newfound electricity, an unspoken shift that neither dared to fully acknowledge, yet both felt deep within their souls. In the soft glow of the morning light filtering through the grand windows, they found themselves sharing quiet, unguarded moments that hinted at a fragile tenderness beginning to bloom amid the cold ruins of their past. Ethan, still wrestling with the shadows of his heartache, began to allow small acts of affection, a lingering touch, a glance that held more meaning than words. The way his hand found hers during a late evening walk through the mansion's sprawling gardens. And though the scars of his past ran deep, he could no longer deny the undeniable pull between them, a magnetic force that drew him toward Isabella's gentle warmth like a beacon in the darkness. One evening, under the soft flicker of candlelight in their elegantly set dining room, the tension that had simmered beneath the surface reached a delicate crescendo as Ethan hesitated before finally reaching out to take Isabella's hand in his blue eyes searching hers with a softness that felt almost new, as though he was seeing her truly for the first time. Not as an obligation or a symbol of status, but as a woman whose kindness and strength were quietly unraveling the walls around his guarded heart. Their conversation flowed with an ease neither had experienced before, the laughter and warmth slowly replacing the cold silence that had once dominated their interactions. And then, when the moment felt just right, Ethan leaned in, his lips brushing hers in a gentle, unhurried kiss that was both a promise and an exploration, tender and cautious, testing the waters of this fragile affection that had taken root between them. It was a kiss full of hope, yearning, and the silent admission that perhaps after all the pain and distance, love might still have a chance to grow. Yet even as their hearts tentatively intertwined, the fragile peace was shattered when unexpected visitors arrived at the mansion. Isabella's family, bearing grave news that sent ripples of shock through both their worlds. Her father, a stern but loving man, had mysteriously disappeared, leaving a void that threatened not only to unravel her family, but to cast a dark shadow over her future and inheritance. The weight of this revelation pressed heavily on Isabella's shoulders, and Ethan, sensing the storm that was about to descend upon their fragile bond, vowed silently to stand by her side no matter what trials lay ahead. In the face of this sudden crisis, their budding romance was put to the test. The raw emotions they shared now entwined with the uncertainty and turmoil brought by family drama. Through the swirling chaos, a single truth remained. Despite their fears, scars, and the unpredictable road ahead, Ethan and Isabella were beginning to believe in the possibility of a love forged not just in moments of peace, but in the fierce storms that life dared to throw at them. And it was within that fragile, aching space between heartbreak and hope that their story truly began to unfold. The weight of the storm that had briefly united Ethan and Isabella seemed to pale in comparison to the tempest that now engulfed their lives. As the once clear lines between ally and adversary blurred into shadows of deception and hidden agendas, Isabella's world cracked open when she uncovered the truth behind her father's disappearance, a carefully orchestrated act entwined with corporate sabotage that threatened to destroy not only her family's legacy, but the very foundation of trust she had started to build with Ethan. Each revelation cut deeper, and as whispered secrets and veiled threats came to light, Ethan's own role in the labyrinth of power and treachery surfaced, forcing Isabella to grapple with a tidal wave of doubt and betrayal that threatened to sweep away the fragile hope she clung to. Torn between the pain of suspicion and the flickering embers of love, she found herself at a crossroads, wrestling with the agonizing question of whether the man who had slowly begun to thaw her frozen heart could truly be the ally she needed, or yet another pawn in a ruthless game. Yet amid the swirling chaos, Ethan's actions spoke louder than words. His unwavering determination to shield Isabella from harm, even as the walls closed in around him, illuminated a fierce loyalty that transcended the shadows of his past mistakes and business machinations. Risking his immense fortune and sacrificing his carefully curated reputation, he plunged headfirst into the dangerous fight to unmask the traitors who sought to destroy Isabella's family. Driven not by obligation, but by the profound love that had quietly taken root within his guarded soul. Every step he took to clear her father's name was a testament to the man he was becoming, one willing to lay bare his vulnerabilities and confront his demons for the woman who had captured his heart. As the conspiracy unfolded, bringing with it betrayal that sliced through alliances like a sharpened blade, their bond was tested beyond endurance. Yet with each harrowing trial, they found strength in the very darkness that sought to consume them. Isabella's doubts slowly transformed into fierce resolve, and Ethan's fierce protection ignited a flame of trust that began to heal the wounds left by years of emotional exile. Together they navigated a perilous maze of deceit, where every whispered conversation and shadowed glance could mean the difference between salvation and ruin. In this crucible of secrets unraveled and loyalties forged, their love emerged not as a fragile flicker, but as a blazing force, defying the odds and illuminating a path through the suffocating darkness. As they stood side by side, hearts pounding and hands entwined, the silent promise between them was clear. No matter how deep the betrayal or how treacherous the storm, they would face it together, their love a shield against the cruelty of fate, a beacon of hope that refused to be extinguished. The weight of the past months seemed to lift slowly, like the morning mist retreating from the vast grounds of the Hawk estate, as Ethan and Isabella found themselves standing on the cusp of a new chapter. A chapter that promised warmth where once there had been only cold distance. The echoes of conspiracies and betrayals still whispered faintly around them, but those shadows no longer held power over their hearts. Ethan looked at Isabella with eyes that no longer bore the sharp edge of indifference or pain, but shimmered with something far more profound. Hope. The night of the storm had cracked open the fortress he'd built around his soul, and now in the fragile light of dawn, he was ready to reveal the man he had been hiding. The man who loved deeply but had been too afraid to admit it, even to himself. He took her hand gently, the same hand that had clung to him in moments of silence and solitude. The hand that had bravely reached out despite the chill in his gaze. His voice, low and steady, carried a confession that spilled from the depths of his being, admitting how he had believed love was a game he was doomed to lose, how betrayal had once shattered him so completely he'd vowed never to let himself fall again. But with Isabella, everything was different. With her, the fear dissolved into a quiet strength, a desire to protect and cherish, rather than to withdraw and hide. He spoke of his loneliness, the ache of losing the woman he once trusted, and how that loss had hardened him, turning affection into armor, connection into distance. Yet in the darkest moments of his solitude, her presence had softened those walls brick by brick, even when he fought it fiercely. Isabella's heart swelled as she listened, tears brimming in her eyes, a mix of sorrow for his pain and joy for the love that was finally breaking through. She, too, bared her soul, sharing the vulnerability she had kept guarded. How every moment of rejection had wounded her. How she had yearned for a love that was real, not just a contract or a cold alliance. Together, their words wove a tapestry of raw honesty and fragile trust, each sentence building a bridge over the chasms of doubt that had kept them apart. As Ethan slid a simple yet elegant ring onto her finger, the gesture was no longer an obligation, but a sacred vow, a promise to face the future as partners, equals, and lovers. The mansion around them, once a silent witness to their loneliness, now seemed to breathe with the pulse of their renewed connection. The flickering candlelight cast warm shadows, wrapping the room in intimacy as if the house itself had softened in the glow of their reconciliation. Outside, the world awaited, with its challenges and uncertainties, but within these walls they had carved out a sanctuary of understanding and hope. Families once distant and wary began to bridge gaps, drawn together by the undeniable change in Ethan and Isabella. Where suspicion and tension had lived, tentative smiles and cautious embraces took their place, heralding a new era of unity. Yet the scars of the past were not forgotten. They were acknowledged with grace, woven into the fabric of their new life as reminders of strength and resilience. The nights that followed were no longer filled with silence and cold stares, but with gentle touches, shared laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. Ethan learned to let go of his fears, piece by piece, while Isabella discovered the depth of his heart behind the walls she had once feared impenetrable. Their connection deepened not just through grand gestures, but in the small, tender acts, an unexpected cup of tea, a lingering glance, the comfort of a hand on a shoulder in times of doubt. Love, once elusive and distant, now bloomed steadily, a delicate flower nurtured by patience and understanding. They spoke of dreams long suppressed, weaving plans for a future where they could both thrive, no longer shadowed by ghosts or bound by societal expectation. Ethan's usual veneer of control softened, revealing a man who could laugh freely and express tenderness without fear. Isabella's gentle spirit blossomed in response, her strength shining brighter than ever before. Their story, marked by pain and betrayal, was now defined by healing and hope, a testament to the transformative power of love when two hearts are willing to fight for it. As the days grew longer and the seasons shifted, they faced every obstacle together, their bond a shield against whatever trials life might send. Friends and allies rallied around them, drawn not just to their wealth and status, but to the genuine warmth and courage they radiated. Ethan's business empire, once a fortress of cold ambition, began to reflect his new priorities, with greater compassion and a sense of responsibility toward those it affected. Isabella found her own voice, championing causes close to her heart, no longer overshadowed but standing proudly beside her husband. Their home became a place of refuge and celebration, filled with the joyful noise of family and friends, the echoes of a love hard-won but fiercely guarded. On a quiet evening, under a canopy of stars, Ethan and Isabella stood together on the terrace, hands clasped tightly, feeling the pulse of their shared future vibrating through the night air. They spoke not just of what had been lost, but of all that had been found, the strength and vulnerability, the beauty and forgiveness, and the unbreakable bond forged through adversity. Tears mingled with laughter as they promised to cherish every moment, to nurture their love with unwavering devotion, and to never again let fear dictate their hearts. The mansion, once a symbol of isolation, now embodied their journey, a beacon of hope that love could conquer even the deepest wounds. In that silence, filled with meaning, Ethan whispered a vow to Isabella, promising not just marriage but partnership, friendship, and forever. She smiled, her heart full, knowing that together they had not only survived their storms, but emerged stronger, ready to face whatever the future held. Their story was no longer one of cold marriage or bitter betrayal, but of redemption, passion, and a love reborn. As the first light of dawn kissed the horizon, Ethan and Isabella stepped inside, hand in hand, ready to write the unwritten chapters of their lives. Chapters filled with joy, resilience, and the endless promise of love's enduring power.